So hello and welcome to our first digital transformation community of practice webinar. The idea behind this COP, community of practice, is to provide a space for, I would say, a thoughtful conversation around digital transformation in higher education. And I would also want to say that I'm just recovering from a bad flu. So that's why I have this baritone voice today. So if I do break into cough, just pardon me. Let's just get started. A few housekeeping items for all of us. Please introduce yourself in the chat. It is such an amazing way to just get to know each other. Let us know where you are from. Please mute your microphone if you're not speaking, so that there's no, confusion or noise kind of while we're having these amazing discussions. Use the chat to ask any questions. We will be monitoring and moderating it. And towards the end of the webinar, the idea is to have around 15 minutes for an interactive session. And we will try to address most of your questions. As I just said, that today's webinar is being recorded. However, we will stop the recording just before the Q&A session. And a link to presenter slides, so we do have an amazing presenter today, is being posted into the meeting chat, and Laura will be adding that the link for your reference. I would like to begin by spending some time on my land acknowledgement. I would like to honor and acknowledge that the offices of eCampusOntario are located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations Intuits and methods. I recognize and am grateful for the legacy of all past, present, and future generations of the First people of this land. I join you today from Toronto, which is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I also want to take this opportunity to recognize the work done by 9 Indigenous institutes in this province. The Indigenous institutes are a key pillar of Ontario's post-secondary ecosystem, and as a member of the sector, I want to recognize and share their incredible leadership for Indigenous-owned and led education. Please learn more about them with the additional links that will be put in your chat, that will be added to your chat. Okay, so hello and welcome once again to the first digital transformation community of practice webinar. And the topic for today is the importance of change management in digital transformation initiatives. A very, very exciting and a very relevant topic, I would say. So a little bit about myself. My name is Monica Shah, and I am a digital transformation associate on the research and foresight team at eCampus. And here I work primarily on running the leadership for transformation, for digital transformation micro-credential. We'll be talking about that throughout this webinar. And it gives me great pleasure to be moderating today's webinar and to introduce our main presenter for today. Joining us today from University of Toronto, Scarborough is Adon Irani. Adon is a manager at the Centre for Teaching and Learning, University of Toronto, Scarborough, where he oversees the design, development, implementation, operation, and support of EdTech and pedagogical technology solutions. Adon will share his experience supporting and leading innovations at a campus of 14,000 students, and Adon is also a learner of our first cohort for this micro-credential. A little bit about eCampusOntario for somebody who's new to eCampus. eCampusOntario is a provincially funded nonprofit organization that leads a consortium of the province's publicly funded colleges, universities, and Indigenous institutes to advance the use of educational technology and digital learning environments. Our membership includes 53 institutions in this province. Our members are faculty, administrators, student support services, registrar's office, teaching assistants, and learners. We actually welcome anyone involved in post-secondary education in Ontario to come find the right opportunity for them. Okay, so just to get the discussion rolling, and because we are here, we're talking about digital transformation. I just want to throw a poll question. Laura, if you could just launch the poll question. This is just inspired by a Hold on IQ workshop that I had attended. And okay, and let me just move it here so that all of us can see. So the question is, how's your DX journey looking? And wow, that's interesting. So this is changing rapidly. And it says that, wow, we've made a start, is already at 50%. We're right in the thick of it. So this is amazing. I would say this just kind of makes it why this topic about digital, why it is so important to have this community of practice to talk about digital transformation, because as the poll shows that most of us have either made a start or we are right there. We've already are on the digital transformation journey. So let me just end the poll, and I will just get to the next slide, which is, so why are we talking about, eCampus, and what is this whole connection between digital transformation and eCampus? So at eCampus, we understand that higher education is in the era of digital transformation, where institutions are redefining how we teach and learn. And digital transformation, or as you can see, DX, is far more than simply adopting a new technology or supporting online education. Instead, what we are looking at is an infusion of digital tools into complex education systems that can transform an institution's operations, strategic directions, and value proposition. And successfully navigating digital transformation also requires a unique vision, perspective, and set of leadership skills. eCampus is committed to fostering digital transformation in the province's higher education sector by providing digital by design platforms, programs, and services. That said, we understand that DX is not necessarily, it's not a straightforward journey, and that there are challenges. And we need to discuss those challenges and identify solutions. The main objective behind creating this DX community of practice is, we thought that we need to have a platform where we can have meaningful conversations around digital transformation in higher education. So for the remainder of today's webinar, we will hear from Adon, who will share with us the digital transformation of their institution's exam support model through the right kind of change management process. And as I just said at the onset, that this will be followed by the Q&A section. So now I will stop talking and I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it over to Adon. So the stage is all yours, Adon. Let me just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Monica. Can I just do a quick sound check and visual check? Is everything coming through okay? Perfect. So thank you so much, everyone. This has been, I mean, everyone, just eCampusOntario, but also all the Ontario, college and university members here that are committed to this, because it's important work and it's difficult work. And what I wanted to share today is maybe two real key kind of things. One is my experience with this digital transformation cohort. I was part of the first cohort, so I've kind of gleaned some lessons learned and put them in the slides just to give you a sense of the value and the excellent conversations that we had in the first cohort and you'd have in future cohorts. And then the second thing is just to give you a bit of a picture of how change worked from my experiences. And I'm going to give you some 3 different pictures of change. So what I'm covering a lot of ground here. We've got the 30 minutes. I'm just going to I should start my countdown so I keep on time. And I will be covering a lot of ground, but then we've got a good 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So my intention here is to kind of paint a picture that maybe feels common to some of your experiences, and then allow us to really get into detailed conversation. But I also want to, in doing that, I wanted to kind of really speak to the variety of change. And I put in my little insert here of the right kind of change management, because change is difficult. And I have 3 different examples. So the first one is looking at sort of traditional change processes. And this is the standard stuff that you would expect to encounter. And I'll give you a story of that. And then I'll give a story of emergent change, where the traditional processes really, I would say, were mal-suited for what was required and what the demands that we were being confronted with during the pandemic. So I'll give you a sort of some insight into what did change look like under those conditions, and then we'll come back to this kind of help returns, and we're back into sort of a restoration of change process. Again, looking at change from multiple perspectives. And for this, I brought in this. It's my favorite framework. It's I mean, 35 years old now, probably 1995, or no, I did my math wrong, but it's aged, but it's aged well. And my goal with this is really just to give us some a bit of a tool to identify different change processes. And the thing about this is, I always come back to building community. That's always my reference point. And building community is the most difficult thing ever. And it's not something you can kind of do stepwise. I really find it's sort of this amorphous kind of process that you go in, that at the end, maybe you've got stronger bonds and this kind of, healthy culture, but to get there, it's not a clear stepwise kind of progression. But with change, especially change management, we want that proper stepwise progression. And why I draw on this framework, these are ideal change models from biological and social sciences. And this is a management science, and it's an incredible article if you take a look at it. My goal today is really just to use this as a reference point. But the 2 key things here, if you look at the types, the units of change and the mode of change, is it the single entity? So from our context, is it the entire institution? Is it the entire campus? Or is it as a whole, like as a strategic kind of whole? Or is it within sort of at the meso level of intra-departmental, and where there's multiple different stakeholders? And obviously, when you're thinking of change at the full campus level, strategic level, there's also multiple entities, but the change is happening at a the larger context, whereas some of a lot of the change that I'll also share today is happening kind of at a smaller scale. It's happening in between departments. So these are just different models I'll kind of refer back to give some context. But the first story I had was around looking at our change management under sort of traditional processes and thinking about what did it mean prior to the pandemic to ask the question of how do we want to deliver or support the delivery of exams. And some facts on the screen here. You may be in similar situations. We're a decent sized campus, over 14,000 students, over 100,000 in total with U of T, but at the Scarborough campus, it's it's about 14 or over 14,000. And predominantly we're an in-person institution. So all of our exams would also be predominantly run on in person. And there was a business case or a desire to look at that and say, well, is this how we want to forever run exams? Are there situations where we want to be able to run digital exams? There were situations, for instance, in accounting or computer science where they were really relying on digital exams but didn't have the infrastructure. So this is kind of a traditional context that you might encounter, where you've got these kind of goals. We want to administer exams with increased efficiency. So some talk around having like a computerized exam center. Would that be a plus for the institution? There's a lot of factors there. So it's an open question. But the other side to this was, and it's coming from the vision of our dean, it was really saying, well, we have students that are not strong with cursive writing. They may not have been doing much cursive writing for much of their school career. They come into university courses where a lot of their coursework is done on computers, not there's exceptions, but it's a lot of coursework done on computers. And then they come into this exam and they have to write for 3 hours. And the gradability, the readability, but also just the comfort for the students, and to have that alignment of the assessment modes that they're experiencing during the semester align with the assessment mode of the final exam. And being able to have typed essay exams was identified as something that would have value. So this is sort of the context. And with this is your kind of traditional evolutionary model. So we had a project champion. The dean saw the need and really wanted to serve our students and get in front of this and think about, well, what steps could we take to bolster up our exam delivery models? And we followed your traditional project management methodologies. So, it's this kind of evolutionary story where there's a variation in the sense of we're going to, I've got a little diagram here to lay it out. So we kind of said, okay, well, there's a problem here. We want to do something about it. So there was this kind of variation where we'd say, okay, well, we're going to have this project charter. We're going to call together. And then, but it was the type of change. I'll just go back a second here. It was prescribed. This wasn't this constructive kind of open-ended process where, any outcome is possible. And we just really are open to just this open-ended discovery. Well, no, this is a formal project charter that went through your standard kind of process, and using the tools that one would expect. And if you're not familiar with these kind of tools, there's likely people in your institution that do project management, and they're wonderful to work with, and you kind of go through this process. So the selection part was really saying, okay, well, we're going to put a pilot in place. They had a steering committee to really steer discuss and improve strategic directions. And then we come up with this pilot where we test out these tools, very fulsome process. I'm summarizing it just in the interest of time, but the end result was this retention. And the idea was, after this pilot, after a successful pilot, it has to be one that gets endorsed, and it did. Something has to actually change. And in this regard, it was, how then, once we have this proven capability to deliver exams this way, how do we roll it out beyond the pilot and reach multiple courses, support students, support faculty? There's access issues here. What if a student, it's a digital exam, what if they don't have a laptop to write on? Thousands of different considerations, but all of which kind of follow. So there was this change process where we did the pilot, came out the other end with, here's a model that we like, has been met with funding, sort of baseline funding, and then it's handed off to my team to run with. So now there's this established service running for digital exams. So this is an example of a sort of this evolutionary story, and a very common one that you'd encounter. So I'm going to give you two others because I think it's useful to see change working in different ways. These are sort of different motors that are operating within your institutions. And of course, I really wanted to pull back to the cohort, the course that we had. This is a quote from the module 3, Ecosystems Ideator. So digital transformation leaders recognize that existing pedagogy and programs can serve as a great platform to build from, and recognize that new delivery and evaluation methods can benefit their stakeholders to absorb and apply the knowledge, skills, and abilities. So a lot of what we accomplished through this project, there was funding, there's some external stuff that had to come in, but the stuff of the workings with which we created this solution were all capabilities that were in-house, and we were able to kind of, through this process, arrange the organization to be able to act in this way. And we've run hundreds of exams. It's been very successful. That's one example. And then this one's a bit of a real insight into the inner workings. And again, my goal here is just to give us some, a framework to bring into our conversations. So with the onset of the pandemic, again, we're in an in-person institution. So there's all these new challenges that were coming out, pressure manifesting in places that, a lot of new dotted lines coming to me from places where work never demands never came from before. And then here I'm, you know, encumbered with a lot of support requests, urgent ones. And what was happening is we had these service models that were well appropriate to the service they were delivering, but they were on the assumptions were now changed. You know, we were now delivering on online exams, for instance. And so this changed the business needs and required this kind of urgent agile solutions. And this is, again, I really want to come back to these change stories, because this one was one that created conflict. So we had these multiple blazing fires, you know, it's the onset of the pandemic. A lot of things were needing, you know, a lot of attention, and how we didn't sort of lack the mechanisms to provide that support. Or if you think about the first change story, that was well planned, it was sort of prescribed, there's a, you know, insight and foresight in how we're going to approach, you know, how do we crack this nut. Well, in this case, the problems weren't even identified. Like it was, we have units that are used to doing things a certain way, and now the next step that they would take is no longer possible. It's like you know, the bridge is out from under them. What do we do in this context? So this really led to conflict. Like it was, the thesis is like, we're a healthy, well-running operation, but the antithesis is, except now for us to complete the work that we need to do, there's this external dependency and no clear understanding over how this work's going to get done, or even what new workflows are required to support this kind of work. So it creates this kind of conflict. The end result is synthesis, and this is kind of I think a fun one. The next slide's a little scary, or the one after this, but I want to give you a picture of what that synthesis actually looked like, because I think it's a really just sharing from my experiences might be helpful for some of you, or for those of you who have had similar experiences and are recovering. Maybe this is a good, you know, touch point as this is a community of practice. It's a safe place for us to support one another. This is a specific example with online deferred exams. You would have situations where a student legitimately is unable to write the exam. Maybe there's a scheduling conflict, maybe there's a sickness. These situations happen, and they're predicted. So students have a workflow through which they can say, well, I legitimately you know, missed my exam and I need to take a deferred, and there's a process through that. And there's a whole team that handles it, and they're lovely. There's 1,000 steps that they're responsible for to provide this service, and they always did it with excellence. And then the pandemic hits, and now all of a sudden we have a backlog of initially about 500, but over the pandemic, we had about 2,000 of these deferred exams online. Not just individual students, but exams. So there's more than 2,000 students writing. It's just a lot of students impacted. But what would happen then is there was just no process to administer these online exams. And that was a problem. You know, we have a department that, again, that conflict, that antithesis of, well, we operate in excellence, but now for us to do the steps that we do, they'd be insufficient, you know, through no fault of their own. Just the conditions changed. The bottom was no longer under them. So this is a little scary slide coming up, but this is what synthesis looked like. And I really chose this diagram purposefully, because I think it's really important. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but the thing was, what I'm trying to show here is this was not a job for traditional change processes. I mean, I would have loved that. I mean, if when this happened, we just could say, well, let's pause for, you know, 6 months. We're going to engage your project management office. They're wonderful. They'll do our project requirements and really come through. We'll do a pilot, all this kind of stuff that we saw in the first act. Well, there wasn't time for that. And we had hundreds of students that were kind of waiting for this service to be restored. So this diagram is where we ended up. We did not start there. It was that kind of antithesis of, well, what do we do here? And if there's sort of 3 tiers here to the diagram. So the first one's the registrar's office, who is responsible for these services. Then there's the faculty. You know, registrars work very closely with the faculty and academic departments to. This is a deferred exam, so it's the prof's exam. We need to get the exam from the prof. and then the registrar's office would administer, well, now administering of the exams online. So what we had then is this new line where my team, and initially me, because my team was at full capacity and these processes didn't exist, but we were now implicated in these service models. So how can we coordinate all of these moving parts and have, continue to walk in excellence? And that was an incredibly difficult problem to resolve. And what I just want to really summarize this, because the way it ended up working, I think was just beautiful. But it all started with getting a primary list of all of the exam requests with the appropriate data attached to it. Now, this is coming from our student information system. It has to align with our learning management system. Those are two different systems. They have a course code in common, but there's a lot of variations that prevent that from being a simple mapping. So all this technical stuff that I know in my brain is just difficult. But the people I'm supporting, they don't really care about those details. They just want to know, how can we serve our students? So is this kind of initial effort of how can I coordinate and communicate the meeting? And these are all techniques that come up in the cohort, the course that we were talking about, empowering this group so that when they interact and we go to the second step, so basically they get a list of all the course requests in an Excel spreadsheet that's clean, that has data in the right places. Now, that was a big piece. Once that happens, then I've written all of these processes that basically take the schematic information and programmatically communicate to our learning management system and automatically set up the course shells. So if you imagine we ran 2,000 of these, automated now, it takes maybe 1 minute for the script to set up the course shell in the correct way. Well, had we been doing it manually, it would have been maybe 10, 15 minutes effort to set up. So there's a 10x, 100x multiplier on efficiencies by automating. And then it allows us to kind of focus our effort on what information does the team need in order to submit these requests to my team so that we're able to have this kind of smooth value flow. So this kind of goes back and forth between the responsibilities of the team. But what we're able to do from this was, at the point when the communication goes out to the faculty saying, hey, it's time to set up your courses, well, the course is ready for them. And then my team, the EdTech team, we've got a forum that faculty can just kind of select a time, and then an EdTech is going to be available to meet with them, which is the step 4, basically. So it's kind of going through this loop where the people who are responsible for their part are able to do just their part within this kind of workflow. And then I'm generating reporting throughout so that the registrar's office knows which exams have been set up and which haven't. So they're able to do their follow-up. And there's just this smushing together of all this craziness into this clean diagram that now my team and the team in the registrar's office are really kind of well aligned on. And where this took up so much of my daily focus initially, because these systems didn't exist, now it's very much hands off, and my team is able to anticipate where something doesn't fit this flow, and then we're able to identify and deal with it. So there's a lot of learning and knowledge that goes into this, but it was really a daily kind of grind, just through relationships, through, not always successfully, and really just trying to bring everyone together in a technical workflow that ensures the students get the support that they need. And it's hugely complicated, but it's a very different orientation to change than it was in the first act. And I'll soon get to the third act, where this is actually now kind of replaced by traditional change. It's this interesting interplay. So I'm hoping this is kind of helpful just for those of you that have had similar experiences, and we just have a good group cry after, or if it's just, maybe you're on the outside of change and you're wondering where some of the, difficulties are coming from. Hopefully this is sort of a helpful expose. So there's a lot of lessons learned here. And one of them was that for this online deferred exam delivery, it was really ad hoc. It required this urgent rethink. The standard project management toolkit, it was really not adapted for these kind of emerging requirements. It could have been, but it would have taken longer. Maybe in hindsight, it would have been still, if we had the resources to do that, but it was a crisis situation, and we had to act fast. And the key is, if we don't have that kind of formal protection of the project management plan and those kind of methodologies, we don't have executive sponsorship, we really come into these challenges where it's the role of the change agent to communicate that meaning and really line everyone up. And sometimes, again, there's the antithesis, the conflict. It's not always, people don't like to be lined up. They might just want to do things the way that they're used to doing it. And that really requires a set of skills that I'm pleased to say our DX course really delves into in some useful ways. So just to close this out for some wisdom from the DX course. So this is from module 2. And a change agent demonstrates empathy and understanding of the impact of change around them and continues to champion and sustain efforts until the goal is met. And this was so true in this context. It's just a continuous effort. Digital transformation change agents and innovators help public sector educators, stakeholders to think differently about how and why, or why and how their institution, classroom, or non-academic programs can evolve digitally and for the better. We inspire action, which is nice. Yeah, wonderful quote. So I'll wrap things up. Let's have a few minutes left. Oh, I've got one more ideal change type here, and this is, I call this the help arrives, and I'm having a little fun with this. I mean, the sequencing, the way there's a bit of a retelling, sort of a re-dramatization of, it's a historic retelling in a dramatic fashion as opposed to, strictly based in the reality. I'm having a little fun in this, but for the purposes of as I said, just to open up discussion and hopefully give you something that resonates with some of your experiences. So there's taking a step back. The picture I want to paint here is, so imagine through the pandemic, all this, like we're all underwater, like it's just a very difficult time. And at the same time, though, all of our institutional motors, like think of these as big gears that are spinning, these things are still moving, maybe at a slower speed than you'd like, but they're moving. And with that, you've got this kind of teleological cycle here where, there's clear dissatisfaction. Like our staff, we need to work within labor laws, and we did. I mean, we have to, but we were really coming up against limits. And as a manager, I was trying to fill those gaps. And, it was well known that this was an unsustainable situation. But how we respond to, it was kind of incumbent on me in that act to come up with a solution that was appropriate to the stakeholders I was supporting. But at a bigger institutional perspective, we've got planning cycles where there's an annual budget allocation, for instance, and there's the resource allocation that requires this high level picture of the institution. And this is what I'm referring to here. So, we had all of this stuff happening, all these pressures on our institutions, but then you've got people that really care about the institution looking, very in detail at where we're at and thinking, well, what do we need? So with respect to online exam delivery, one big change that came out of this, when the budget cycle sort of caught up, we increased the size of our ed tech team. Our student help desk has more now. A lot of that's casual staff, but the composition also changed. They added some different staff roles, so that's it's increased to meet the demand. Whereas prior to the pandemic, we could operate on a smaller size team. During the pandemic, that put incredible pressures, and so then through this kind of search cycle where we're looking at over time, over these kind of annual cycles, we've corrected the staffing levels or brought them to appropriate current levels. And then we've also, and I should have the point on here, we've also invested in a lot of technology around so we're using ServiceNow for ticketing, and we've got Office 365 with Teams and all these kind of capabilities now that we're using behind the scenes to equip our various teams to work together. So when there's a triage that maybe comes to the student help desk, but has an ed tech component to it, behind the scenes, we're able to bring all this together. So all of this kind of happened because I was able to get, appropriate resources and then work with the staffing to really build systems. And so this is different kind of change process. And with the deferred exams, a lot of this actually now through central IT, and I'm close to wrapping up, they've implemented some system enhancements that allow them to collect exams in a way that pretty much allows us to bypass the need for the online exam. However, there's still one big thing, and other institutions may be encountering this. In the past, for accommodations, we would have students who might request remote access accommodation to an exam or to the lectures. And in the past, we might say, well, we're not equipped to do that. Like, we just didn't have the, for remote access to a course, yes, but to the exam, you know, it wasn't always the case. But through the pandemic, through again, the work like this that created these workflows that allow us to operate in these ways that are more expedient and to the needs, we've kind of proven that we can operate in this way. So now these workflows may be deprioritized from online deferred exams, because that service model now kind of goes back to a more sustained model. But for the students that require accommodations, where it's an approved accommodation, well, we have that flexibility, and the teams are now sort of trained to interact in these ways to deliver that capacity. So there's all of this additional benefits that come from that sort of Act 2, the ad hoc change, which now really kind of comes into full force that we've got, this kind of more strategic now allocation of resources. There's better alignment with their service needs, and then all the learning gets incorporated, and we can kind of build on that. So just to sum up, I've got another wisdom drop from the DX course. This is the final module, the DX Manager. So our digital transformation leaders recognize that the change they're driving requires analysis and measurement to effectively iterate through the project lifecycle. So they're clear about measuring their inputs as well as the outputs of their efforts to efficiently redesign institutional programs and services. A DX manager is an analytical leader who's informed by data and measurement as the foundation for future decisions. So DX managers relentless in their pursuit of the vision, using best practices of project management. So that's my concluding, that was what I wanted to share. And just to sum up, I really just wanted to reiterate how wonderful of a program this was, and that the knowledge that I gained from it was really useful, but having the opportunity to connect with colleagues and really kind of have those collegial discussions, I found just to be, it filled a gap. I really, appreciated that. And I can imagine others are maybe in a similar place where you're just still kind of shaking off the challenges that you've been carrying for the last several years, and maybe want someone to talk to. So with that, I'll pass back to Monica, but thank you so much. And I really did find this to be a genuinely useful program, and so excited to be a part of it moving forward.
Wow, thanks, Adon. I mean, this was so engaging. I myself learned so much. Maybe you could just stop sharing your screen. And we are good with time. So, you know what, the main idea of this is to have a conversation. So I would just open the floor. Just raise your hands, ask questions, and Adon and wherever we can answer, we're here to have this conversation. Or even if you want to share anything about your experience with change management, the floor is just open. And yeah, Krista. And I think we can stop the recording, because now is the Q&A session.